Hi, I'm Wayne Madsen, and you're listening to the Falcons Nest podcast.
I'm Lewis Reese, and you're listening to Falcons Nest podcast.
I'm Anuj Dal, and you're listening to the Falcons Nest podcast.
Well, David Griffin, welcome to our first podcast. We thought no better guest than get yourself on, club historian, statistician, photographer, and many other things. Welcome.
You're very kind, and that few quid I slipped in your back pocket has obviously come in handy with that introduction.
Griff, great to have you on. We're overlooking a beautifully sunny county ground. I mean, it's not often we get a start to the season like this, is it, weather-wise?
No, I was talking to Zach Chappell a few minutes ago. I said if somebody had offered us 6 days of pre-season where we wouldn't lose a single ball to bad light or bad weather, and we'd be sitting there covered in sun cream and wearing shorts, you'd have said it's not going to happen. You might get lucky one day, but you're not going to get 6 consecutive days. It's been absolutely wonderful for everybody, really, for people to come out and watch, for the guys that are getting used to doing all the tech stuff behind the scenes, and obviously the players to get out there and get some miles in the legs.
Is this up there with probably one of the best weathers of pre-season?
Absolutely, 100%. I can't recall a March. I think even stats are showing it's one of the driest Marches, I think, since 1972. So I hadn't started watching then. So yeah, I've never known it this good pre-season.
Yeah. So first podcast, kind of, we're looking at Derbyshire's untold stories or funny moments throughout the club's history, dating back to 1870. Probably ones I've heard, but the audience might not. We're talking about burning minute books and dodgy accounting, probably to start with.
Yeah, the dodgy accounting, that came at the end of the 1880s. Basically, there was a guy called Sam Richardson who we would probably revere to this day were it not for his criminality. This is a man who was the captain of South Derbyshire Cricket Club, which was the forerunner of Derbyshire. We were founded in 1870 and he was our first captain. Captain as in the first game we ever played at Old Trafford in 1871. And when he retired from the game, he became the club's assistant secretary. Now, at this time, in the early 1880s, Derbyshire were also playing cricket in the winter, and Derby County Football Club was the offshoot of the cricket club, and they were formed alongside us and played behind where we're talking now. We're in the media centre. The football pitch was just behind us. It's where Derby County played their first ever game, and the pitch was so good it hosted an FA Cup final replay, 6 FA Cup semi-finals, and all of Derby County's home fixtures. But unfortunately, Sam Richardson, who'd become the assistant secretary and was also assistant secretary of Derby County Football Club, was actually basically siphoning off the funds. If you'd got 15,000 people on the ground behind us, no turnstiles, no proper ticketing arrangements, so to the average member of the public, or anyone else for that matter, you'd look at the crowd and think, if he tells us it's 10,000, it's 10,000. And he'd put the rest of the money in his pocket. So he had it away with loads and loads of money. Eventually, it was the Demon Spoff, the great Australian fast bowler, who came to Derbyshire, married a girl from Bredsall, and played for Derbyshire and was captain in our non-first class years at the end of the 1880s, who actually unmasked him. And even when he unmasked him, the rest of the committee said, no, that's our Sam. We've known Sam for years, honest as the day is long. But finally, they confronted him at the Bell Hotel in Derby to meet him, and he admitted he'd been basically embezzling funds for years from both the football club and the cricket club. The upshot was that they let him go and said, we'll resolve this in due course. And what did he do? He went to the shop that he worked at on Babington Lane, a tailor's shop, took the takings from the shop as well, as though he's not already had enough, got a train to Nottingham, then to London, then to the South Coast, over to the continent, and then became the tailor to the King of Spain, and died aged 93, the longest surviving cricketer from that 1871 side. So they say crime doesn't pay. There is, however, a really, although it's quite sort of a dramatic and humorous in part story, the reality is that because of that, in 1891, Derby County said, we don't want to be associated with Derbyshire anymore. We're going to the baseball ground. Now, had Richardson not been responsible for taking those monies, they might have stayed here, and what became the baseball ground over there might have been on this site. And don't forget, at that time we had first-class cricket, top-class football, and it was a racecourse. This could have been the epicentre of sport in the East Midlands, but instead the racecourse shut down eventually, and Derby County went over the road.
So how was he unmasked then? You think of your Australian overseas player Caleb Jewell at the moment. It's quite a different life for him to back in the day what your overseas players were getting up to.
Well, in those days, the captain, as he was really right through till not far beyond the turn. Well, no, actually beyond the turn of the century, 2003. I recall Dominic Cork as captain being at a committee meeting when I was on the committee. So the captain was at committee meetings, and I think he probably just looked at these count books and minute books and thought, there's something doesn't ring true here. And because he was Australian, well, not just because he was Australian, because he was an outsider, I think it gave him that alternate view. It's like being outside of the family kind of thing. Everyone trusted him, but this outsider could see, no, there's something not right here.
Spoke about burning a book, something that's obviously kind of, you look at back now from an outsider thinking quite petty, but obviously something very historic that was lost in those books that were eventually lost.
Yeah, William Barclay Delacombe. It was born on Ascension
Great
Island.
name.
Absolutely. Well, Ascension Island, I've been there. It's in the South Atlantic. It's midway between Africa and the Falkland Islands. And when we went to the Falklands, we went to Ascension Island, as did most of the 5 Brigade and all the rest of the people that were going down to the Falklands in '82. And he was our honorary secretary. And we don't quite know why, but we just know that in a fit of pique, he burnt minutes books and score books. And you may well say, well, you know what the scores were because we've got them on other accounts of them. They were in Wisden, and now they're on Cricket Archive. But what we haven't got, for example, is a scorebook from 1896 at Old Trafford when George Davidson made 274, still our highest individual score. And there is something, I've done it many, many times, about opening a scorebook and looking there and there at the pencil or the pen that's been, handwritten on the day and looking at that, and we don't have it, and we don't have the minute books. In many ways, the minute books are more important, greater losses, because they tell us more about what was happening at Derbyshire, things that we didn't know. In the last 50 years, there have been things that we've unearthed from the minutes books. I'll digress for one moment. There was a minute from 1973, I think, maybe 74, where our club was offered 2 overseas players, and the committee of the day, including the cricket committee, deemed that these 2 players lacked experience and therefore would not add much to Derbyshire's team. And they were Andy Roberts and Viv Richards. So there is a great store to be set by these minutes books, maybe not today but in years to come, and to be able to see just what, and particularly all the stuff about Richardson. We only know this from anecdotal stuff and newspaper reports, but we've not got the actual minutes. It'd be lovely to see at one meeting they say, oh no, we all trust you, you're a good lad, and then the next week, no, you're a wrong un. It would have been great to see how that was minuted and how it played out.
Why burn them then, and especially the scorebooks? Well,
we don't know. I'm assuming he fell out with somebody. I mean, this happens in life, doesn't it? Never mind in sport. But I would imagine it was just a vindictive. Somebody upset him and told him, "You're not doing this. You're not doing that." And presumably, in a fit of pique, he just decided to set fire to them. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
And, when you go back and tell these stories, I guess something that fascinates me when you're plucking this at the top of your head is where did you get this information in the first place? Where's your sort of go-to for... Because this is more than just your sort of facts and figures. These are the anecdotes, as you say.
When I was a boy, I sat at school, and then I've still got my hymn book from school, and inside the cover I've got the Derbyshire squad for 1977, which I sat in assembly and wrote the squad out, and I put honours, which at the time was the 1936 championship. And I had an absolute fascination with numbers and history, not proper history, what I call school history, but I was always just fascinated. I have no idea why, because and things just stuck. And I used to love getting a yearbook every year because you'd get it, and of course it was an account of the previous season and all the scorecards and all the match records and everything else and the stats at the back. But there would always be features about people and places and things. And I always found these really, really fascinating because sometimes there was stuff, they used a different language for a start and to what they do today. And so you'd read accounts, people. I remember reading, I think it was Ian Hall's benefit brochure, and Guy Willett, who was headmaster of Pocklington, played for Derbyshire, was our president and chairman of cricket, and he used, I think he wrote something about let's adumbrate, and I thought, what does adumbrate mean? ADU? I don't think I know to this day. It was something about before I adumbrate any further, what? And I just loved these kind of words. And of course, people who died, you used to read the old obituaries, and people died of things like consumption and dropsy and all these kind of things, which I'm sure people still die of, but they've got found a nicer way of telling you. And as kids, you just sit on the balcony, on the boundary, and pore over these. Somebody died of dropsy. What page? 42. And you just all sit and laugh at it, really, which is just silly. And as I got older and older, I just wanted more and more of this. Trying to explain it is probably not an illogical thing to do. It's just always gone in for some reason, and just have a fascination with it.
Jumping forward to another story, don't want to get it entirely wrong, but about a pub quarrel and murder in the end.
Oh, Bill Beswick. Well, you see, back in, we're talking about an era when players, for a start, many of them came from the coalfields, and most of them had amazing thirst when it came to alcohol, and there were a lot of people of relative low intelligence because they'd not been educated. And Bill Beswick, unquestionably one of the finest cricketers ever to play for Derbyshire, 1,452 wickets. He played till he was 52, strong as an ox, holds the record for the best individual bowling performance in an innings. He took 10 for 40 at Cardiff in 1921 against Glamorgan before lunch, and apparently overnight had been plastered, but you know. And there are legion stories. I mean, the one about, before we get to the murder, well, it wasn't a murder, but it was a death, but we'll come to that in a moment. The story about Bill Storer, who played Test cricket for England, was England Test wicket keeper, and there was a game at Chesterfield where Storer was 216 not out overnight, and Bestwick was also not out, and he was the number 11. And they get to, in those days, games started at 11:30, and they got to the start time, and Bestwick hadn't arrived. He was asleep in a pub somewhere, and so they had to declare, and Storer was left 216 not out. But no, the story in 1907, Bill Brown, who was someone who Bestwick knew, and there were all sorts of stories which have done the rounds over the years, about whether or not there was perhaps something illicit going on between Bestwick and Brown's wife. There are all sorts of different stories. But basically in Hena, there was a kerfuffle in the street. Bestwick suffered a facial injury, and then later in the evening they met each other once more, and it resulted in Brown being stabbed with a knife by Bestwick. It wasn't quite the kangaroo court that people think. It wasn't literally the next morning, but within days there was an inquest jury, and the inquest jury found that he'd acted in self-defence and no case to answer. So, it wasn't murder, it wasn't manslaughter, it was no case to answer. Someone was killed but no case to answer. But to finish with Bestwick, this is a man who, his mother died at the age of 11, at which point he was sent down the pit. In the colliery at Shipley near Ilkeston. So, the kind of life and upbringing that these people had compared to today, astonishing really. But yeah, he was down a pit at 11, and a remarkable life. But he went on to become an umpire, and he even umpired Test cricket. So, and there's a great story. I think it's the one about Dennis Compton, and Dennis Compton's early in his career, it might even have been his debut at Lord's, and Bestwick's umpiring, and a ball hits Compton on the pads, and it wouldn't have hit another set, and Bill Bestwick gave him out. As they're walking off, Compton's partner said, "I didn't look out to me," and Bestwick said, "I never, I'm busting to go to the toilet." so that was that, and you kind of, whether these stories are true, as Ted Bovis, for you listeners who ever watch Heidi High, he used to say, the first rule of show business, never be afraid to exaggerate. So he was a larger than life character, there's no doubt about that, no doubt about it at all.
I'm Pat Brown, and you're listening to the Falcons Nest podcast. The rivalry returns to the county ground on Friday the 6th of June as the Falcons take on Notts Outlaws. Get your tickets now.
Well, there's a couple of tangents I was thinking of going off there, because you talked about sort of the drinking, and there must be a few stories from back in the day, but also the umpires. Is there one particular for each that you like to go down? But because certainly drinking, you think of how the game's changed in that regard. You wouldn't get away perhaps with, in the era of nutrition and everything that you would in the olden days.
Well, even in my watching era, I'm going to go to the late 80s. At Chelmsford, I remember being in the team hotel by accident, just walking past it, as some of the players were returning from a drink elsewhere in Chelmsford. And me and my mates at the bar of the team hotel till about 3 o'clock in the morning. This is after the first day of the championship match. There's a Sunday League game the next day, and that was kind of the norm, really. That you'd be out, and it's very, very rare even in the 80s and 90s particularly, that you went out wherever you were. If you're in Scarborough, you're in Cheltenham or wherever, you'd see Derbyshire players either in the pub or walking from one pub to another. And one of the great things, of course, was the pint after the game. The post-match pint, where you often just stood and listened, whether it was umpires or players. And it happened in the grandstand back in the 70s and 80s. You just stood there and listened to I always remember a lovely story when Gerald Mortimer was writing for the Derby Telegraph. I mean, he did 40 years football and cricket. And one night he was in the grandstand chatting to some cricketers, including Tony Borrington. And it was all very convivial, and it's what you did at the close of play. And the players just started to drift away, and Tony was the last one to go. And as he walked away, Gerald just grabbed him by the forearm and pulled him towards him a little, and he said, just a word of advice, he said, I wouldn't recommend that either you or any of your family read the Derby Telegraph for the next couple of days. So he clearly lined something up to have a little dig at him. What was the other point? The
umpires.
Umpires, yeah. Well, I mean, Kim Barnett told me this story, and I can't remember the umpire's name. It might have been Jack Van Geloven, but there was an umpire who travelled everywhere by train, and he would come into the dressing rooms at tea. I'm sure it was Kim told me this story. Would go into the dressing rooms at tea on the final day and say, "Don't forget, lads, I'm on the train at 5:30, so get on with it."
No,
There's a great. No, there's the story about. Now then. Was it Cess Pepper or one of the other umpires? Again, this was a Kim story about Alan Hill. Now, Kim Barnett was a dasher, an absolute dasher. He went out, opened the bat, he took it on from ball one. And Alan Hill was obdurate, a wonderful cricketer, obviously just recently stepped down as president. And a fine, very obdurate, brave in the face of fast bowling, first player ever to wear a batting helmet for Derbyshire, but obdurate, didn't really, he wasn't a flashy player. And they were playing, I think, at Taunton, and a spinner was on, and the umpire said to Kim, who's at the non-striker's end, and early in his career, so quite young, he said, "I like the way you're batting, lad, I really do, I like that, you're getting on with it." He says, "But him at the other end, he's going to have to go if he don't get on with it." have a word with him at the end of the over. And Kim says, "I walked down to Bud and I passed the message on." He said the next over, he traps him in front, on the pad, and he says the umpire just put his finger up and, "I told you." And that was that. But Ray Julian was an umpire who used to use the phrase, "We've got to keep the game going." Got to keep the game going, and he gave out record number of LBWs. So yeah, lots and lots of stuff like that. I think it is unquestionably a different world. Unquestionably, for a start, you got match referees, streams, TV, everything has changed that. But they were glorious days, nonetheless.
I think one of my favourite stories, personally, on your level, is the game at Edgbaston where they'd shut the bar at. Was it 2 p.m? Yeah,
in the old days, licensing laws until 1988, when they opened the pubs till you could open extended licensing hours. Traditionally, in a pub on a Sunday, you open 12 till 2, 7 till 10:30. And the same applied in cricket grounds. However, they gave cricket grounds an exemption, and so, which is why Sunday League cricket was so incredibly popular. You've got to shut for an hour at 2 till 3, but because you've got 10,000 people in the crowd, we'll let you open the bar. So yeah, I went with my mate Paul to the bar at Edgbaston, 1987. At 1:45, game would start at 2, and then there'd be an hour of no beer served. And yeah, I went to the bar and said, could I have 48 pints of bitter, please? And she went, 48? I says, well, there are 6 of us. And it's only in recent years that I've thought, what rate were we drinking at? Because back then we didn't think anything of it. But we'd only got an hour we'd have thought, well, it's 2:45, so there's 15 minutes. Then there's an hour, so that's an hour and a quarter. And then there'll be a rush for the bar at 3, so we'll give ourselves 15 minutes. But we're still banking on drinking 8 pints each in an hour and a half, which we would have done. That game was well. I remember that game well because
I'm surprised you do somehow.
I remember it because the supporters club said we're stopping drinking on the bus because 1 or 2 people were getting a bit lively, and on the way there was a raffle on the bus and I won a bottle of brandy and drank most of that. And I've got a photograph of me on the bus that somebody took. I'm holding the brandy up and I've got a pair of jeans on, and on the way back I've got a pair of shorts on, and they're not my shorts. So yeah, it was a lively game, that was. But it was good fun. They were great days.
And the supporters club coach, that's no longer around, is it, as such? You must have some good memories, some of those longer journeys in particular.
Some great journeys. One of my favourites was going to Edgbaston in 1979 for a Benson Edge Cup match, and the bus caught fire on the way back. And I don't know if you still do it today. We thought it was the height of amusement that as we set off from Edgbaston and we're driving back home, that as kids, I was 17, my mates all the same, 15, 16, 17, and you shout, the bus is on fire. And of course the people at the front, who we all thought were old and fuddy-duddy, but were probably only about 40 or 50, they're all like, oh, they're at it again, these kids. And we go, no, the bus is on fire. And it's a rear-engine bus, and it was on fire. So yeah, that was good fun. The bus to Worcester in 1980, we went to a Sunday League game. Righty got 91 and we won. But we got to Worcester, and the supporters club took us there, and then it would come back here, and then we'd all get the Felix bus back to Ilkeston. But we got back here, and the 20p or whatever bus fare it was to get home, we'd spent it on chocolate or a pint of beer because we'd had a bit more than 20p, but beer would have only been 10 bob a pint. But we got back here and we're all stood in the car park over there behind the grandstand. We're all grubby and filthy. We've got our rucksacks with our one last cob left in it or whatever, and nobody's got any money. And it's about 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. There's no mobile phones and nobody's even got 2p to make a phone call. So we've only one thing for it. We've got to walk home. Well, it's 10 miles to Ilkeston. What we don't know in the meantime is the police have been called out. I think the army. And eventually we made it to about West Hallam. I mean, it's pitch black, and that's 7 miles away. And then suddenly this police car come up to us. Have you lads been to the cricket? And this and our parents were roaming around Ilkeston trying to find us. But yeah, they were good trips. What's astonishing, of course, is what you could do then you couldn't do now. We had a Sunday League trip to Swansea, there and back in a day. You wouldn't risk it there because you'd have to go to Canterbury for a Sunday League game, there and back in a day. I think the one I will mention was in 2008. Was when we went on a coach. It was the club coach, and they said, Griff, do you want to jump on the bus rather than drive down? And it's for a one-off 45 or 40 over game at Canterbury. So we got down on the bus on the Saturday night, went on the Sunday morning to the ground. It kicked off at 2 o'clock. Derbyshire were all out for 60. They knocked them off in no time. The players spent half an hour in the dressing room getting told off. Then they did the media commitments. Then we got back on the bus, then we drove back and had a stop for an hour at a service station, and we still got back here to Derby before the scheduled end of the game from Canterbury, which is 202 miles away from Derby. So yeah, that was a shocker as well.
Mentioned Gerald Mortimer earlier. There's been some press box antics down the years, and probably my 2 favourite stories, or a couple of my favourite stories of Derbyshire history that have come from press box fiends of playing tricks on unassuming reporters.
Yeah, I think in every workplace you find, kids sent for a long wait or a tartan this or a left-handed screwdriver. They've been doing the rounds ever since Adam was a lad. But in the press box we had the triumvirate. We had Mike Carey Neil Hallam and Gerald Mortimer, and they were you know, you didn't want to rub them up the wrong way. They weren't violent or aggressive or anything, but their pen is mightier than the sword, but they were tough cookies. You know, they didn't suffer fools, and just occasionally they would get someone in the press box from a national newspaper or even the Evening Post down the road who perhaps looked down a little. You know, we're looking out now at a ground that is unbelievably developed. If you think back to 1980, everything you can see on this ground now, none of it was there. And so not even a pavilion. There was just the old jockeys' quarters over there and the grandstand there, none of which we owned. And there's one occasion when a guy came in, I think this was the one from one of the nationals down south, and was being a little bit disparaging about Derbyshire and about the ground. And he pointed to a player in the outfield asking who he was, and they were told, he was told that this guy, they'd obviously rehearsed this, that it was actually Ferenc Schwarzenbrucken, and that he was a Hungarian refugee who'd been discovered skimming stones into the Black Sea by a Derbyshire committee member who thought he looks useful, I'll take him back to Derby to play cricket. And apparently he published this. This was published in the newspaper. Now, it was actually Fred Swalbrook, who was as English as me and was born on Stockbrook Street, I think, in Derby over there. And the other one was a guy, there was a player he used to play for us called Dallas Moyer. He was 6'8", 6'9". He was of Scottish extraction, but born in Malta to Scottish parents. And again, a guy from Nottingham, disparaging about the ground, a bit sort of ahead of himself, full of himself, and asked who a particular player was, and they told him that Dallas Moyer he was Japanese, and he was the tallest person born in the history of Japan, and he was their handball captain. Of course, there's nothing true. He was a slow left armer from Scotland. And apparently he published that too. So, that lovely stories. I mean, to be honest, I think working in a press box, it lends itself to that kind of humour a little bit sometimes, because we are just having fun, really, aren't we? And at the end of the day, we're just watching cricket. We're not commenting on world affairs, are we?
I was going to say, I think you've kept a bit of that humour alive, yourself and Dave Fletcher. I mean, every time...
Oh, not Fletch. Definitely not Fletch.
You're taking all the credit, but... I mean, it's a long day as well to work on, isn't it? You've got to keep your spirits up. I think if you think of a day 4 when you're meandering towards a draw, I guess it's a key part, if there's a few of you in the press box, to keep spirits high.
100%. I've said this time and time again, particularly to young people who come into cricket. This is not an exact truism, but cricket is not hard work, but the hours are long. And I think that applies sometimes to players too. You might do nothing all day, but you're here from first thing in the morning till the evening. And then you look at the media teams that work in county cricket at every county, are yet generally the first to arrive at the ground and almost certainly the last to leave. Ground staff are on the same sort of level, but we have T20 matches here where the media teams and what have you, they're here at 9 o'clock in the morning, and an hour and a half after the game's finished, they're still here putting the finishing touches to things. So having a good sense of humour and having a laugh and having a joke is absolutely part and parcel of what we do up here.
I think we'd like to say we've got the best press box antics in the country.
Yeah, I mean, you're bound to be biased, but I think what we're blessed with is we have everybody here at Derbyshire on the same floor. We have the broadcast people, we have the media team, the press team, the scorer, everything is all on one floor. And it does allow for that kind of joined up connection where you go somewhere, I'm trying to think of Headingley, for example, or Edgbaston, you're all on different floors. If you're lucky, you might catch up at the break. But, if I go to Edgbaston for a T20, the likelihood is I don't see Fletch. Whereas if I go to... Well, here, you see him all day long because you're all on the same floor. So, yeah, I think we've got things right at this place, yeah.
And obviously your journey from sort of a young fan to now more of this, I guess, senior role in the club where you do various things, getting down pitch side and the photography. Do you miss those days where you'd be on the beers on a coach to a game, or are you quite happy with what you do now in terms of making that direct contribution to the club's sort of media outlets?
I think it's just, it sounds a bit grand, this, doesn't it, evolution, but, we still... when we get down to Cardiff on the 1st of May, the day before the first proper away game, because we're in the East Midlands for the entire month of April, I'll be just as excited to go into Cardiff to Tiny Rebel with Fletch and some of the lads and go and have a pint and whatever. But no, I just, it has evolved. It's been a thing that's evolved, but still, the people I sit alongside on the boundary, people like Paul and Goot, these are people that I've sat next to for best part of the 50 years. So they're still there with me, but I've got other things as well to do.
I think one final story. I think you've dubbed it as genius or insanity. And I think you might know where I'm going is with
indeed. I do indeed.
The pre-match announcements.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could do a cast just about PA stories. Maybe that's one for the future. Just PA stories, because there are some absolute, just brilliant ones. But the story I'm going to tell you now, this is from 1983. Now, we're looking out towards the pavilion, and where you can see the club shop, just slightly to the left of that was the judges' box, and the judges' box was still here till 2010, 2011, and that was where the finishing line was for the horse race. So we know exactly where the racecourse was, because they finished there, because the judges' box had to be in line with the finishing line, and that was used from the moment racing finished, really, through till 2010, 2011 as a score box. It was used for storage, but it was the PA announcers' box, and it had a big bell hanging from it. And somebody came in, and obviously, as you know, there's a 5-minute bell, which some clubs use, some don't. It's not a requirement. It's not in the regulations or anything. But anyway, it got rang. Anyway, somebody came along and stole the clapper out of the bell, which was bad enough, but then came back the following day and took the entire bell. Now, it was big. It was a good 18 inches high, so you'd get something for scrap.
Heavy as well, sure.
Yeah. Now, nobody, including me, I don't think, gave much thought to what you're going to do about the bell for next week. Now, bear in mind, we're looking across at the pavilion, the old pavilion. Now, to the left were the home changing rooms, to the right were the away changing rooms, and the white door that we can see open at the moment, that was the umpires. So even if the umpires did need to notify the players that they were going out at the start of play, they'd just literally look a couple of yards to the left or to the right and say, off we go. So there was no major need for the bell. But we turned up the following week and we got a game here, and I was over there. There used to be an old supporters club stand where the big stand is at the far end of the ground at the City End. And all of a sudden, there was the PA system. It used to click on. It was very clunky. They'd always got the volume turned up, so it clicked loudly. And then you would normally get an inhalation of breath from whoever was going to speak. So it would be click, like that. And all you got was click. And then we heard this sound. And it was the bongs off News at 10 that had been recorded off the television. Now, this is 1983. Alistair Stewart was the reporter or the presenter. Now, there was no recording, editing function or anything, so basically they'd put a little mic in front of a telly, and it came on and just went bong, but they hadn't been able to edit it, so you got bong in Parliament, bong, the Queen this morning, bong, union officials. Not everybody on the ground was helpless with laughter, because you think to yourself, what? Not so much that in itself was funny, but what went through their heads. Henry quite rightly said, was it genius or Madsen? Madsen. Madness. They'd got 3 weeks. It was Brian Holling, Ken Rowe and Les Hart, who were 3 stalwarts of the club, absolute diamonds at this club, worked on the committee for decades. But what went through their heads of all the options they could have had? Who came up with, do you know what, I think we should record the bongs off News at 10. And sadly, all 3 are dead. And to my eternal regret, I never got the chance to ask them why. Because it is magnificent. But genius or Madsen? Madsen, I've done it again. Genius or Madsen? Or is Madsen a genius?
Yeah.
There we
That's
go.
the episode name sorted.
And have we had a bell since, is my final question? Or are we using the BBC News theme at the moment?
No, there's been a bell over there. There's been a hand bell. There's been all sorts. But there's nothing. I mean, there isn't one at the moment that I can see, unless somebody comes out and rings a handbell. We used to have a steward in the changing rooms, but we don't now, so it's probably not.
Well, David, thank you ever so much for joining us. I hope people listening have heard as many laughs as we've had along the way, and we'll definitely be having you back very soon.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.